Record to computer. Does it say it's recording on your end?
Yeah.
Perfect. We can get rolling.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to the 2025 Shorebird Steward training. We're very happy to have you here today, and thank you for your interest in shorebirds. Whether you're here just for more information about shorebirds, it's a great video for that, or if you are interested in being a steward volunteer at any of our 12 sites, we are happy to have you. My name is Abby Burke. This is my first full year at Audubon, and previous to this, I was a shorebird biologist with the National Park Service at Cape Cod, Cape Lookout, and Cape Hatteras, and I also did interpretation works at many other western parks that you are familiar with. And introducing our new coastal program manager, Aaron Rogers.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Erin Rogers. I'm the Coastal Program Manager for Audubon, South Carolina. I'm also pretty new, just like Abby. I started last June, and I'm really excited to talk to you all about this training today. Abby has some really great information for everyone, so we'll dive right in.
All right, so just to give you an overview of what we will be talking about, we're breaking it up into large scale picture of where this work fits in with other birds in the world, big picture stuff, how stewardship actually works, and then some basics about shorebirds, how to identify them, which ones we're looking at, and site specifics as well. And on to more background about Audubon, South Carolina, which is, think of it as an arm of the whole National Audubon Society. So we went back there. So our mission as Audubon, it's a hemispheric wide organization. So there's organizations in North America, Central America, South America that are all Audubon, and that's because we protect the same birds. Um, it's a big flyway that all the same birds will hit, and we kind of condense our mission into protecting birds and the places they need, which involves protecting habitat, it's the green leaf, climate action, policy, and community building, which is all weaved into stewardship as well. So this is what I was mentioning before about the flyway. So that little map is the tracks of all types of birds, whether they be shorebirds or songbirds. They use the whole hemisphere for their nesting and their migration. So we are hemispheric because the birds are hemispheric. We work together across the flyway to protect common birds. And like I said, Audubon, South Carolina is just one unit of National Audubon that works throughout the state. And within that unit, Aaron and I are the coastal unit. So the rest of Audubon, South Carolina protects all the other bird species in the state and their habitats. We are specifically the coastal unit. And we work with partners all across the states, both within Audubon and other organizations, again, because we share the same birds. Um, in South Carolina, in particular, there's about 187 miles of coastline and 35 barrier islands. So it's a lot of space to hit um, for conservation partners. And let's move on. So we're going to get more into the birds specifically later, but before we get any further, it's important to qualify which birds we're talking about. We are talking about the shorebirds and seabirds. I will use the term shorebirds, but it kind of basically encapsulates any bird that nests or rests on the shore from the tide line um, to the grasses. So that's those birds in the picture there. So those are the birds we are focusing on. Um, that's their only living space in the world is that strip of beach. from the marsh to the high tide line. Um, and sort of the big hook I find for myself and many people interested, it's like, well, why, why are we doing this? It's because coastal birds have declined 70% in the last 50 years, which is very hard to even fathom. But again, it's because of they have that very limited habitat strip. Um, and they're sort of broken up into um, their different behaviors. So we have shorebirds that nest here, we have shorebirds that are migrating, and we have shorebirds that just come here for the winter. Now, South Carolina is special because we have all of these different uh, uses of shorebirds. We don't just have nesting shorebirds like many places in the Northeast. We have shorebirds are coming here for all of these different things. Moving forward. So the decline, I mentioned that horrible statistic, but why? And that it is due to, and it's a bit of a term called the coastal squeeze. They're being impacted by climate change. So you have higher tides, more severe and more frequent storms, which all wipes out nests. Um, you have predation, which, yes, predation is a natural fact of all life, but the predation that shorebirds have is a result of an increased number of predators on the beach because of human activity. They're drawn to the beach because of human trash, usually, or because the barrier island that they live in has been so built up that they are forced onto the beach areas. Um, so predation has drastically increased. Habitat loss, again, the simple occurrence, especially if you think about most of the beaches in South Carolina, there's massive developments on most of the barrier islands where these birds would be using. And with developments comes just people sitting on the beach all day, beaches being groomed, large boardwalks being built. That's all loss of habitat. And habitat loss can also be from climate change with the storms literally completely eroding beaches at a faster rate than normally occurs. And then finally, you have all this going on, and your birds finally have a spot on the beach, and human disturbance is a huge, huge cause of decline. And that's just little things that people don't even recognize. It's just the simple act of a person walking their dog absolutely terrorizes shorebirds because a dog is a canine and canines are predators. So it's things like that, kites, beach driving, basically every activity a human does on the beach besides walk, because that beach, like I pointed out before, is their exact habitat. So out of these four things, human disturbance is the particular element that stewardship focuses to reduce. It's very difficult day to day to reduce the other three. Obviously, as a large organization, Audubon is working to mitigate climate change, protect habitat, but specifically, shorebird stewards are focused on mitigating the effects of human disturbance. And that is stewardship. Without a community of people working within coastal shorebird stewardship, this program and others like it wouldn't work. So stewardship is that idea of a community coming together to reduce human disturbance. And the larger picture of stewardship, it's not just us. It started in 1923 with one island, which I believe was on the Texas coast. Um, it was a coastal warden program designed to protect the last known reddish egret colony from poachers. And so that's how stewardship got its start. And now it's spread across many states in the Americas with over 1,300 volunteers at 500 sites. And stewards are out there being a voice for the birds, but it also informs coastal conservation to be able to create rules that better protect the shorebirds. So looking at the specific um, South Carolina stewardship, it began in 2016, so relatively recently, with 3 sites, and up to our max of 12 sites recently. We're aiming for 12 sites again this year, with volunteers serving just about 3,000 hours a year. And we have about 135 volunteers a year, which is incredible. And we are hoping to continue along this amazing tradition. Um, So moving forward, what is stewardship? Essentially, in a nutshell, it's preventing human disturbance to the resting and nesting, no, for wintering coastal birds through education and awareness. So it's the boots, shorebird stewards are the boots on the ground education that shorebirds need. Um, the number one job of a steward is to educate and inspire, to get people to care about the birds, get the local community behind them, because the local community doesn't care, then it's hard to protect the birds long term. Um, and it's important to note that this isn't, you don't need to be an expert birder. In fact, most of us are not. You are there as a voice for the birds. So as long as you know the beach regulations and some shorebird basics, anyone can learn enough to be an effective steward. And after this training, you will have those basics that you need. Plus, it's very much the best way to learn is to be on the beach. So fear not, you will be plenty prepared for stewardship. So we touched a little bit about human disturbance before. Um, what exactly qualifies as disturbance? Essentially, it's all activities that humans do while on the beach. So whether it's running, biking, playing with your dogs, uh, boating and landing on the shore, flying kites, drones, they are all seen as predation um, by shorebirds. So in this picture, um, you'll see the folks running and biking. Biking is essentially a vehicle. So something moving that fast, even if you're going slow, a shorebird doesn't have enough time to run away. The chicks can't fly, so vehicles, whether it's a bike or a car, um, are simply gonna hit birds, and that's been documented many times. Dogs, like I said before, are a canine, and that is a predator of shorebirds. Um, which, many people would be like, oh, well, Fluffy, he's not going to chase the birds. Even if the dog isn't actively chasing the birds and is, politely on a leash, the birds still see the dog there. And that is enough to cause chick mortality because the parents have to fly away, or the parents are trying to defend against the dog and something else eats the bird. It gets killed by exposure. So, what are the other ones I didn't mention? Anything that is flying, so drones, kite surfers, regular kites, look just like aerial predators. And so the birds react to it as if it was a predator and they're wasting their energy against it. So that is a good encapsulation. Again, it's very difficult to find the balance of enjoying the beach, but also protecting the birds. So we will explore that throughout this presentation. Now, another important thing our stewards do is after their shift, they fill out a very brief shift report, which essentially says what you saw throughout your shift. Um, you know, how many dogs did you see? How many bikes did you see? Did you see people walking in the closed area? And at the end of the season, we compile all of this data and it tells us which areas we need to focus on. We can break this down beach per beach, but also for all the sites, which is what this graphic is showing. So it's obvious from the graphic that dogs, whether they be on or off leash, are a major disturbance that we need to focus on. And, you can be out there, and I think everyone who has been out there will notice these things. But if you're actually going to get a rule changed or a rule passed, you need to have data to back that up. So these shift reports that stewards are doing are our way to back up what we're saying. You can't just say, oh, yeah, I mean, dogs are definitely a problem. I see that a lot. That's too anecdotal. Like, we need to have the backup data. So thank you to our stewards every year who do fill out these reports because that has become invaluable to us. Um, and here's just an example of a disturbance that ended up killing a colony. Um, so from the naked eye right here, I mean, you can't blame someone for not noticing birds. However, this is a roped off area, right? So you might not see birds, you might not see nests with your naked eye, but it's protected because they're so small. And what happened here was a dog was off leash and ran around. It didn't even run around in the colony. It was just running around in that area. And that ended up causing the colony to abandon because there was just too much, if there is too much constant disturbance that the adults can't fend off, then they will unfortunately abandon their colony because they know their chicks are not going to survive. Um, so there was actually 60 nests in this area. And and this was in Florida, after two dogs ran around the area, the colony abandoned and only a few were left. So that is a very good example of the importance of letting people know about the harm of disturbance. So how do we address this? What does stewardship look like? So stewarding is essentially volunteering on the beach for a couple hours at a time and just having informal conversations with beachgoers to educate them about shorebirds. So, and this slide shows a couple of stewarding setups. Each site is unique, so setups can differ. And also stewards, they choose what works for them. So some sites, stewards will bring a chair and an umbrella and they'll set up in a spot away from the colony, but sort of close enough where they're gonna intercept people coming that way. So in that respect, there's little walking. Or if you're really into birding, such as the picture on the left, you can, just walk out there with your scope and sort of patrol outside the nesting area, getting an idea of what the birds are doing, and it being more of an informal, walking up to people or people coming up to you. So it can, whatever works for you, and whatever works best for your site. You can do a lot of different things for your stewarding. So when does this occur? Essentially, like I said before, because the birds are here all year long in some capacity, we have stewarding all year long in some capacity. The spring and summer is when migratory birds come through and when nesting birds nest. So that is the time when we have most stewards because there's the most people on the beach and therefore the most disturbance. You have those summer holidays when that's just what people do is go to the beach on the holiday. So the beach is super busy. And when nests and chicks are around, that is the most critical time, obviously, for shorebird populations to expand. is with these nests and chicks. So that is when protections are absolutely essential. In fall and winter, we also have stewards for some sites, not all sites, but they are there as a voice for the migratory and wintering flocks. These flocks often come thousands and thousands of miles to roost on the beach. So they are there to be a voice for those flocks to make sure people don't scare them away and waste their energy. But as a whole, there is less people on the beach in the fall and winter, so it's not quite as critical, but still important. You know, whatever time you are available, we will gladly have you because there are some birds out there that will need protection. Um, so during your shift, we are now sort of shifting into um, some stewarding tips and tricks that you can use. So it's a good practice. Again, you don't have to because you're a volunteer. We can't force you to do anything, but it's a good idea to keep tally throughout your shift of which human disturbances you're seeing and how many, and also keeping track of bird activity you're seeing. You know, hey, I just saw a Wilson's plover pair, um, or I just saw three Wilson's plover chicks over there. That data is very important too. So whatever you're seeing, write it down. Um, but to get into the stewarding tips, you have to be positive. It can be a challenge for me because when I see someone doing something that's going to harm the birds, I get heart palpitations and I'm angry. But you have to come at it as very positive and ease into the conversation, making analogies, saying, "Oh, your dog is so sweet. What's his name? I have a dog." Like, get into it very politely and show interest and listen. Don't immediately alienate them and yell at them. And kind of create it as that is the social norm for this beach, you know, by stating most people who come to this beach walk around flocks. So if people feel they want to feel like they're doing the thing, you know, so by creating it as a social norm, uh, rather than the law states you must walk this way. If you're like, well, people here on this beach always walk around the flock, then people may be more likely to comply. It's always important to be prepared for the beach conditions. I will touch on this later, but you know, it's going to be wicked, wicked hot. You're going to need lots of water. You're going to need to know the tides and the weather forecast and be aware of any changes in that because it's nature, things change. Um, yeah, be ready to educate and inspire anyone that you see. So think of it as education. It is in no way law enforcement. You know, you're not, you have the backup of the fact that these birds are federally protected. Um, but you are not there to give them a ticket. You are there to give them a reason why these regulations are the way they are, to kind of guide their view of beach birds as a positive and educational thing instead of a negative experience. You know, by asking people to share in the responsibility and be a good neighbor. And again, just being very friendly and positive, even though inside you might be very angry. Um, Again, it's important to keep an eye on the birds. So during the nesting season, the area where the birds nest will be closed and roped off. But the birds don't know that. So they might nest outside of the fencing. So if you are a person who likes to walk around on your shift, be ready that there could be a nest outside the fencing. So always beware of how the birds are behaving. Um, and again, just talk to beachgoers informally. They, you know, people are usually on vacation, they're chilling, so they don't want to have a big lecture coming at them. Make it a conversation. If they seem positive and non-harmful, give people a chance to look at the birds. because it's hard to build a connection with something that you can't see. And if you don't have binoculars or a camera, it's just like a little sort of feather in, you know, you can't see them really without binoculars. So if when people see them, suddenly they're like, oh, yeah, or when they see chicks, oh my God. Um, it can change perspectives, but be careful who you're um, showing chicks to because we don't want anyone going after them and harming them. Um, but again, remember you are representing Audubon and the partners we're working with. So a lot of sites are working with state parks. So you're also representing the state parks. So we don't ever want to come across as rude or something like that. So all good things. So I just touched on this a little bit, but it is a very fine line when you're telling people whether they're a photographer or a beach goer. I always hesitate to point out a nest or chicks because you don't know what they're going to do. Um, some people could go in and destroy the nest because they don't want the regulations. Um, or they could be, we have a lot of great steward photographers, and we've never had problems with our steward photographers, but it's the other photographers that can be the problem. So it's important to gauge a photographer before you go and divulge a cool thing to photograph. So you'll end up with a bird paparazzi as seen on the left, where a lot of people will completely disregard the respect for a shorebird um, in order to get that great photo. So like you'll see that picture of eggs up there. A disrespectful photographer will just go up and, too close, scaring away the parents, and, just for the photo. So just be wary of that. And if you do get to do something cool, like I am in the photo, banding oyster catchers, sometimes DNR or the state parks will invite you on absolutely amazing opportunities. Um, just make sure if you're going to post that this was done by permitted research. Otherwise, people will just see you holding a bird and be like, oh, I guess I can snatch birds too. Or, oh, I guess I can take that same photo, even though I don't have the permissions like you did. So just be wary of the ethics of shorebirds. Again, we haven't had any issues with our own stewards. It's the other people. Um, so shifting into safety, which is very critical, and obviously your safety is more important than doing a shorebird shift. The birds will be fine. So you need to protect yourself, which means knowing the weather forecast and looking at the skies. Because in the summer, I think we all know that it's gonna thunder probably every day at some point. So be wary of that moving in storm and get out of there when you need to. If there is lightning, please just leave immediately. Again, I'm not faulting anyone for not doing their shift because of weather. So please feel free to make the best choice. Also note, I am not keeping on an eye on the local forecasts where you are. I am based in Charleston and I just am looking at the NOAA weather or my iPhone weather. So I can't make the call for you because you are physically there. So that is your responsibility to know your tides and forecast and make a safe decision for yourself. It doesn't make sense for me to do so because I'm so far away. Also beware of heat stroke and know these symptoms. I know many of you have lived here many, many years and are very comfortable with the heat, so that is great. But it can happen to even people who are well used to it. So just always know those symptoms, monitor yourself, bring way more water than you think you need, all of the sun protection, and have a cell phone or some way to call emergency if you need to. And here's just a visual on some good things to bring during a shift. Um, Binoculars are some way to look at the birds. And if you are unable to um, get binoculars, then we should be able to provide you some. But a good camera will do the trick. A scope that can really help. Um, you know, with your experience. Again, snacks and water. Most sites, there's some sort of bird guide in the little kit, um, which can help you, if you see a bird, oh, wait, I can't remember, just having that little flip book and be like, yes, okay, that's an oyster catcher. And it's also nice to show people pictures too, if they can't see that far away. Um, and, whatever first aid equipment you may need for yourself, and then sun protection. So we're going to shift gears to where is this occurring? It spans the entire coast at 12 sites, which some sites come and go depending on if birds actually nest there or if stewards actually show up that year. So, but generally we have 12 sites. Um, so 12 sites, look at this map. If I am not responding to your email right away, it is because I am at one of these 12 sites. Most sites take me more than an hour to get to. So I'm on the road quite a lot and then out in the beach. So please keep that in mind and be patient with me. I will respond to you as soon as I can. Um, but this is a look at our sites. They are all completely different. Bull Point and Morris are islands that you have to have your own boat to boat to. Kiowa and Seabrook are autonomously run because they are private islands, so they have their own organizations that facilitate the stewards. And then you have Huntington, Edisto, and Hunting state parks. So those are run in conjunction with the state parks and the rangers there. And then we've got sites like Isle of Palms and Bull Point, which will only have stewards if a colony actually nests there. So some years yes, some years no. Yeah, so that's just a spread of, they all have wildly different logistics. And here's a few of our partners, which we could not do this without because they are the most local to the sites, or in the case of SCDNR, who we work with most closely, they have jurisdiction over the beaches. They do all of the protective nesting fencing for the shorebirds, and they also gather shorebird data at many sites. So they are the true backbone of all of what's going on here. But we also work with all of these other wonderful organizations from time to time. That's weird how working is separated there. But yeah, so you may be wondering if you've been doing, all of this work, is it actually working? Well, actually, it is. It has been physically proven in a recent study that sites with stewards and shorebirds nesting have larger and increasing shorebird populations than those that do not have stewards. Um, and that was a study led by an Audubon, National Audubon science team, and they looked at 400 sites in the Gulf where there was stewardship and some sites where they were not. And they looked at 4 species in particular. And they noticed that the birds at the stewardship sites grew 2 to 34 times more than those that didn't have protection. So that is very exciting. And there is also another ongoing study that is also looking at the effects and, is stewardship working? So that is really good to hear. So every time you're out there, and just know that it is working and you are doing a great job. So kind of another piece of the puzzle here is when you're day in and day out, it's like, well, like, what is this doing? Well, with the data that you are gathering and the hours you are out there, that is all valuable information to us and our partners, because we have Audubon has a whole policy team that advocates for different regulations based on what we're seeing in the field. So there's sort of a direct line up to bird protections. Um, so that is very exciting. Okay, so what birds are we talking about? We've been talking about birds, but now we're going to talk about which birds. So I always throw around the term shorebird, seabird. What are the differences? Well, a shorebird is a solitary nester. It nests by itself, completely camouflaged, just out there on the sand, and they forage for mollusks, crustaceans, and worms along the shore. A seabird is a colonial nester. So that's something like a least tern, or basically any tern species. They're in these massive colonies. It's the same sort of habitat as a shorebird, but all of their nests are together. So it's much more obvious, and they are very loud and protective. Um, and a seabird, as hence its name, they hunt for fish, whereas shorebirds are, hunting for little things along the shore. So those are the main distinction. But because they nest in the same sort of habitat, both are able to be protected by our work. Um, so we're going to break down the different sort of behaviors. So there's migrating, nesting, and wintering birds. And this is a very nice visual of who is doing what when. Um, so starting off at the beginning of our main stewardship season in the spring, which is March through May, you have migration going on for these specific birds, the red knot, piping plover. Then from about late March through end of July, you have breeding season. And again, the oyster catcher and Wilson's plover are your main breeders of shorebirds. And then fall migration starts by the end of July, really. So you have another suite of birds coming through there that use the beach. Um, and the title is, it's fall, but it's basically late summer. I don't consider July fall, but the birds do. And then you've got your winter, which starts in August, which is definitely not winter for us, but it's winter for a bird. Those are just like your people from the Northeast who spend their winters down south. They are here chilling, taking up space, eating food, um, just to prepare for their next crazy breeding season up north. So it's a very important visual on who is here, when, and doing what. Our migratory birds. So migratory birds, they usually flock in the hundreds, they fly hundreds of thousands of miles on long migrations throughout the spring and fall. And usually migrants, they nest up north, and up north meaning like the Arctic, and then we'll go down south, whether that be South America or the Caribbean. So they are typically here for short periods of time, and their goal is to rest a lot and to eat as much as they possibly can to fuel that migration. So I think of it as if you wanted to drive from northern Canada to Chile in South America in a car, you need a lot of hotels and a lot of gas stations and McDonald's to get you there. And if all of those were wiped out, you would not get there because you couldn't rest and you couldn't get food and you couldn't get fuel. So I think of the gas stations and McDonald's as shorebird habitat. So they need those beaches, um, our shores, for that critical fuel. Otherwise, they won't be able to make their journeys. So that's why I think not many people put much thought into disturbing a large flock of shorebirds on the beach. Like a lot of people just think it's cool to see birds fly. Um, but every time they're flying, it's decreasing that energy and food supply. So that could mean that they can't make their massive migration successfully. So it's important that they have that space to eat and rest. So the nesting portion, which is my favorite and where I have the most experience. Again, it's only from above the high tide line and below the thick grass. So it's a very small margin of area. Um, and it has to have like things on it. So whether that's some rack debris, some little rocks, the little divots. They like stuff on the beach. Whereas where a perfectly groomed beach, like near the Folly Pier, that's horrible habitat now. It's destroyed because there's nothing for a shorebird to eat and nest in. So they have to have sort of all that little stuff. As you can see here, kind of where these nesting terns are. See, there's stuff. Um, so the first thing they do is they're finding a mate, they're choosing their territory, and then they make a potential nest called a scrape. And it's literally a little divot in the sand. And the bird sits in it and kicks his legs up, and that's their potential nest. And then the female will choose what she likes best, and it will hopefully become a nest. Um, So essentially, they'll lay 1 to 4 eggs, and then they incubate. They must incubate them constantly for a month. And then once they hatch, they're not like a robin chick that just is naked and lies there and needs to be fed. They hatch and they're like, we are gonna eat, we are gonna forage, we are gonna go down by the water. So they're all over the place, but they can't fly yet, and they're very camouflaged and about the size of a cotton ball. So from a protection perspective, is very difficult to protect that. So, somebody driving by on an off-road vehicle, they're just not going to see them. So that is, in a nutshell, the threat that nesting shorebirds face. And as you can see here in the bottom right corner, they completely rely on camouflage, so their nests are really not visible. So I get so many people who they're walking in the fencing because they had to go to the bathroom or something, and they're like, "Oh, don't worry, I wasn't going to step on a nest." And I'm like, even if you were looking for it, you probably wouldn't see it. So it's very difficult, and that's why there has to be fencing. People are like, "Well, I promise I wouldn't step on a nest," but sorry, you probably would. So and going with this portion, most states along the flyway have a shorebird monitoring program that they keep track of every pair of birds and every nest, and then the chicks, and ultimately comes up with how many chicks came out of a site. The productivity number. Was the site successful for bird reproduction? So we are helping State of South Carolina begin a program like this. So we're very excited. Um, and this is when I was a shorebird biologist. I still don't have a good camera. And I kind of took these pictures as jokes to my family to be like, look, here's my lovely picture of a shorebird nest. But they're actually very helpful, I think, to realize, because I can show you the most zoomed in photo of a nest and you'll be like, yeah, I see that. But that's not what you're going to see on the beach, because on the beach, you are standing up, looking. So all of my photos are like unzoomed in, um, what you would actually see. It kind of just demonstrates how hard they are to find. Um, the only difference is with these photos, um, what you're not seeing is there's usually a bird there panicking. Um, so always be paying attention to the bird behavior because that's how you're going to find the nest, um, is by the bird behavior, not by actually seeing it. And these are all taken, I should say. So I was doing shorebird monitoring. So it was my job to be in the fencing looking for nests. So you're not going to be in the fencing. But like I said before, they could nest outside of the fencing. So I think it's helpful to know um, what they will look like. So this picture here is actually the largest of the shorebird nests that we have, and that's an American oyster catcher nest. And let's see, I think I can make a little circle here, potentially. This is the nest. That's all it is. Those are about the size of like a chicken egg that you get from the store. But again, they're the same color as the sand. They got little speckles on them. And you can kind of see the tracks here. So that's another giveaway. So we're going to look at some others. We're ramping it up a notch here. These are piping plover nests, and obviously you can tell this is not the South because there are rocks present, but piping plover nests are essentially identical to a Wilson's plover nest. They are, oh, it's not going to show my finger, but they are very small. Okay, so bigger than a robin's egg, but um, smaller than a ping pong ball. And let me circle. So give yourself a minute there to think of where you think they are. And I will circle again if I can even find it again. So this is a one egger right here. And this one is a good example again of how they like to nest in sort of that stuff. I think it's right here. I watch this back. I'm like, no, it wasn't there, but it's I believe it was there. Um, so yeah, hard to see. So, switching gears to our wintering shorebirds, which are much less stressful because they are, they're like a snowbird person from the north. They're here to chill and feed and relax. Um, so the main species of concern for wintering birds is the piping plover, as shown there. Let me go back again. Um, And so again, you during this main spring summer season, you won't be seeing the wintering birds, but if you do wintering stewardship, then those guys will be your focus. And I guess the key there is, in case this isn't difficult enough, they change their plumage in the winter. So they all look incredibly drab. They lose their nice breeding feathers and look drab like this fellow right here. Um, so difficult, but it's less stressful. The nesting, also, as you can see here, this fellow has bands. So a big thing in the winter is, so this bird, it could have laid a nest up in Massachusetts and came down here for the winter, but we won't know that unless it's banded. So the bands will literally tell you where they are from, which helps those conservation organizations that watched over the birds when they hatched. So always, if you've got a super good camera or scope and you are able, get the band numbers and report them online. I believe it's like reportaband.org. Just Google it because it will depend on what bird species, and there will be plenty of references online to help you get that to the right person, because those biologists will be psyched when they find out the bird that they worked with day in and day out, when they find out where he is wintering, because it completes the circle. It also, we need so where the birds are nesting, people are conservationists are spending a lot of efforts to make sure they hatch. So all that work would be for naught if they came down here to their wintering habitat and had complete chaos on the beach with bicyclists and drones. And so they need a safe spot in both their breeding and wintering habitats. So it is important for us to maintain vigilant with mitigating disturbances for them here. So feeding. Um, like I said, chicks, when they hatch, they are feeding immediately, and it depends on the tide, which is when they're going to be feeding where. So at low tide, they'll be down low at the water line feeding. At high tide, they'll be up the beach roosting and resting, which is what this diagram shows. That's when it's low tide, they're foraging. When it's high tide, they're roosting. It's also important to note that in the summer, when it's really hot, they'll be doing most of their activities in the early dawn hours or in the evening. And then midday, they'll just be uh, hiding more or less, like sheltering, just trying to get through it. So if you have a midday stewarding shift in the summer, just know that you might not be seeing them just because they're sort of laying low during the hot hours. Um, so that's also why it's important, since they're restricted based on the time of day when they can be out. If there's a ton of dogs down by the shore and, in the early morning hours, that's like their only chance to feed before it gets really hot. So, it's important that we, again, mitigate that disturbance because they are limited. So we've been talking about a few species here and there. And we sort of focus on five focal species we call because they are the declining the most compared to others. And they are also present here the most compared to others. So out of the five here, these are either all federally or state listed. And again, they are specifically in our area. So we will go through each of these. Um, and it is important to note, because if you're looking at these guys here, um, you might be thinking, um, oh, I can think of another bird, that's also important. Well, yes, they are. And by focusing on these species, there are other species that use that same exact habitat that will benefit from what you're doing, your education, your protection. And they will benefit, but we don't necessarily have to do anything different because they nest in the same way. So, one example of this, was not even on this umbrella effect slide, is the black skimmer, because they nest in same habitat as least terns. So depending on your site, you might see them as well. And while we're not necessarily focused on their population numbers, they also get protected sort of under this big umbrella of protection because they're in the same habitat. Willets are another one. They're more of a wading bird and they nest in the thick grasses, but when you have the nesting fencing, those grasses are also protected. So that's another bird that benefits from our work. So the first species, which we've already touched on a bit, our wintering species is piping plover. They nest north and they winter and migrate here. And I mentioned the plumage before, so this is the plumage that you would see here. It's pretty undistinctive, but that's why I'm showing you this picture because this is the way you'll see a piping plover. Normally they have a thick black neck and an orange beak, nice dark feather here, but they're just chilling in the winter, so they don't need to look pretty. I have a sweet spot for piping plovers because I did their breeding work up on Cape Cod, which proudly is where they're doing best right now. Um, but essentially, they have five breeding populations. All of them are threatened except for the Great Lakes population, which those are endangered. Um, they went from, they had initially 800 pairs, but then it got down to 10 pairs by 1990 in the Great Lakes population. And now they have 80 pairs. So that team is really working overtime to get those birds up and going. So again, it's important. A lot of what we've been finding is a lot of the Great Lakes population spends their winter in South Carolina and our beaches specifically. So that's why our work is so important. It's to kind of complete that cycle of protection for them. Um, yeah, so piping plover. And this slide kind of shows a bunch of different examples. Um, it's also worth noting that just seeing a picture of it is not necessarily the best way to identify. I always look at their mannerisms as well, and where they are feeding and kind of how their beak is, because that sometimes is more, I mean, a lot of these little birds kind of look the same. So I'll get to that more later. Essentially, there's a good look here at the size scale and some of their breeding plumage as well. Again, they blend in very well. Red knot, so one of our migratory birds, a very, very special bird. They are one of the longest migrants. They can fly up to 19,000 miles every single year. They nest in the Arctic and then winter at the coast of South America. And obviously, that journey requires a few stops. So, what we've been finding is that there's a significant population of red knots that uses South Carolina in particular, usually mostly Kiowa and Seabrook. Other spots as well, certainly hundreds will go there, but thousands of them will specifically choose Kiowa and Seabrook as their big rest and feeding point on that journey. So again, we got to focus on being a good stopover, safe stopover point for them on their journeys. Uh, Very, very cool bird. Again, this is a hard bird to identify if it's like just by itself, because in the winter it's extremely ordinary and drab. But I can tell a red knot if it's in its flock based on kind of the size of the bird, the way the flock moves, and if they've still got a little bit of their red plumage on them. Least turn. So now we're on to, so those two are not nesting here that we just saw. Um, they're coming through here at some point. Now we're talking about birds that nest here. So the least turn, I have a love-hate relationship with these guys, because they are extremely aggressive. They are a seabird, so they nest in large colonies, and they are vocally protecting and physically protecting their colonies. So unlike solitary shorebird nesters, who you won't really tell there's a nest, you will know these guys are nesting. I promise, because it will seem like there's a lot of them. They peep really loudly, and if you get too close, they will dive bomb you and do like a swoop poop at projectile poop, go right for your head. They have the worst screech in the world. And the bottom right photo there, I think, is what I will probably see before I die, because it's just like the least turn zooming in on your head, and you're like, oh no. But so that's just a fun way that you will know it's the least turn. Um, again, they eat fish, so they well, also they're made to dive straight in the water and pull out a fish, and then they'll flash it at the female, and if she accepts it, then they will mate. Usually, sometimes she'll just take the fish and leave. Um, but here's some good looks at them. There's a look at them copulating the top left and the middle right. There's a look at some chicks there at various stages. These chicks are a little bit more, I believe the term is precocial. They get fed most of the time, so they're not as on the go as plover chicks, but they still can move. So again, it's worth keeping an eye out. And they've got like the stubbiest little legs. Adorable. Um, they nest similarly to Wilson's, which we will look at again, just like a naked scrape on the ground with two tiny little eggs. Eggs are the same size as Wilson. So if you were to have a Wilson's plover nest right next to a least toad nest with no birds in the area, they essentially look exactly the same. So it's the bird behavior there that tells which nest it is. Um, and here's the cute little thing what I mentioned with their fish courtship ritual, which, I think would apply to me as well, because if somebody brought me fish, I'd be down. But here's a look at how the male is fish flashing and the female's like, nah, no, not good enough. But this one, she's taking the fish, so they will probably end up having a nest together unless she just leaves, like they sometimes do. So our other shorebird that nests here, well, that was a seabird. This is a shorebird. Our other nester here, the Wilson's plover. Here's a good look at one. Again, kind of, small in size. The thing to look at to know it's a Wilson's plover is that big honking beak, um, which you might not think is that large, but when you start looking at a bunch of other little shorebirds, a lot of shorebirds have a very narrow beak meant for like pecking in the sand. These guys have this big chonky beak because they can also eat fiddler crabs in the marsh. So their beak is a little bit more meant for that. Um, these guys are state threatened, and like other species, they, you know, early spring, they're staking out their territories, and then they begin scraping, which is making the potential nest. And then the female will choose one and make it a real nest, put eggs in it. And then they have to constantly, all the nesters are like this, they have to constantly be on that nest, incubating it or shading it. So that's where if there's disturbance, a dog runs through and the bird gets off the nest, it's either going to fry in the hot sun or get eaten by a predator. So I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, that they're like, oh, what's the big deal if it flew away? Well, it's very critical that they're on that nest. There's a look at a chick there on the bottom left. Again, cutest little thing in the world. And the exact color of the sand and brush. It's also important to note that after the scraping begins, you might see them copulate or mate. And please make a note if you see that, because if it means you will soon have a nest. So always beware of their behavior, because that will kind of clue you in on what to expect. Yes, can't overemphasize enough how camouflaged most of these birds are, especially the Wilson's plover. Um, Again, a look at the nest there on the top right, super small, super camouflaged. Even when the bird is on there, you can't see it very well. The chicks, again, super camouflaged. And to make things worse, so though they can run around really fast, when they see danger, they will often just crouch because they're like, oh, well, no one will see me if I don't move. Well, that is true. The vehicle or the person won't see you and they'll just get squished. So it's important to know that behavior. And this video, I don't know if it plays anymore. That's the pointer. Anyway, when they see danger, they will do this strange looking behavior called the broken wing display. And that's to lure predators away if you are too close. So the best way to describe it is it just looks like there's something wrong with the bird and it's very stressed. And it's like you can see in this image, it's it's just freaking out. It's flapping its wings. It's like just looks odd, and not normal. So if you see that, that means you are close to a nest. Um, or if you see the bird doing that to perhaps a beachgoer, that means that they're too close to the nest. And that's it's quite an energy taker for the bird to do that. So essentially, it's like, I have an like, oh, predator, I have an injured wing. Follow me this way, right? Follow me over here, when the nester chicks are really somewhere else. So it's a distraction tactic, which I guess works for predators, but doesn't work for humans because they're just like, what is that? What is going on? So please keep an eye out for that. And if you see that, do not move because you are near a nest. Just move really slowly and back away, watching every single step you take. So what do we have next? Oh, my personal favorite, the American oyster catcher. So you name it and they do it here. They nest here, they winter here, they migrate here. And they are the largest, of our focal species and the most obvious to the naked eye. They've got that nice, beautiful orange beak. They're larger than the least terns and the Wilsons. Um, they're just so distinctive and they nest in similar ways. Let's see what the nest. Yeah. So as you might have guessed, they eat oysters. So they tend to be a little more oyster bed focused, especially in the winter when they just like shore up in the thousands. South Carolina is really cool because we have nesting and wintering. Um, so if you're here in the winter, and you have a boat, you might be able to see that out in marshes. I'm really excited to see it myself. But here in the spring, they'll be nesting. So similar behaviors to like the Wilson's plover. They are solitary nesters. They do the whole scrape thing where they choose the best scrape and they lay invisible eggs in it. But these eggs are larger. They're like the size of a chicken egg. So a little bit easier to see, but still camouflaged. They also defend their territory like the other birds do. So again, be keeping an eye out for these specific behaviors because it will tell you, what's next for the bird. And they have tiny little chicks that, are also up and feeding right away. They sometimes they get fed by their parents, but they also do their best to feed as well. Also very hard to see. They take a little longer to fledge as well because it's a longer bird with more specialized feathers. So sometimes they can be flightless for like a month and a half almost, um, which is just more time for me to be stressed that they could get eaten. Um, Again, one of my favorite birds. It's listed as a species of highest priority in the state. So that's like, so I think of threatened as endangered of becoming endangered, and then highest priority is like endangered of becoming endangered of endangered. So it's one less, but still important to keep an eye on, especially because they are here for many different parts of their life cycle. Oh yeah, this is a page about their, wintering. They host a third of the whole Atlantic coast, wintering population, which is very, very special. And since these are a larger bird, their bands are a little bit more visible. So again, if they've got bands and you've got a camera, we'd love for you to report bands because it can tell you where, they are from. So again, we talked about this umbrella effect. So we have many of these that are at risk of soon becoming a priority and threatened species without conservation efforts. So such as the black skimmer, the willet, sanderlings, whimbrel, ruddy turnstone. Um, Again, sadly, just about all of the birds you will see on the beach are declining, 'cause they all use the same habitat, which is susceptible to human disturbance and rising sea levels, climate change. So they're all under threat. Just some more critical than others. So I added this slide because I get a lot of, oh, what's this bird? What's that bird? I'm having trouble. Yes, it's very hard. I still can't quite do it, but I added this because I wanted to have a sort of little cheat sheet here. Um, so the important part again is to pay attention to their location on the beach and their behavior. Sanderlings and sandpipers, which are on the bottom, are usually they don't nest here. They're just feeding frantically in groups at the shoreline. Narrow, pointy beaks, they're just going to town. Now, plovers they're just more casual about their feeding. Um, they just don't have that same urgency look as the sandpipers and sanderlings. And they're usually by themselves unless it's a wintering plover. Sometimes they'll be with others. And obviously, a giveaway for the Wilsons, if it's in the spring, those guys are going to be just with their mates. They're not going to be joining any of these big um, feeding frenzies. They're going to be stressed because they're a new parent or about to be a new parent. So they will be acting differently. So that's another way to kind of tell. Because sometimes the semi-palmateds and the Wilsons look similar. But again, a giveaway is if you've got one bird that, does it keep going up towards the grasses rather frantically? Is it feeding by itself? That's kind of an indication that it's probably a nesting Wilson's. And again, that chonky beak, that'll tell you it's a Wilson's, whereas pipers and semi-pollinated, it's just got a narrower beak and there's usually some bit of orange on it. Wilson's, no, it's completely just huge. Um, so yeah, that's a helpful hint. So I touched on this before, but given how critical nesting birds are, it's important for us to know how many successfully fledge or successfully become a grown-up bird from each site in order to understand how well the population is doing both on that beach, like how well are oyster catchers doing specifically on Folly, and their regional population as well. So this year we're piloting a study just at one site because there's only two of us, um, with the goal of monitoring the nests, and then they become chicks, and eventually determine how many fledges, how many adult birds came out of the site. And then when you compare that number to the number of nesting pairs, that's your total productivity for the site. So if you had like 8 pairs of nesting oyster catchers and you ended up with one fledged chick, that's not very good. Um, if you had 8 pairs and ended up with like, you know, 5 fledged, okay, that's good. So that tells you about how well your site is doing. So if you've got a low number, it's like, okay, well, what was it? Was it the constant predation by like one or two specific types of predators? Was it human disturbance? Was it just a bad year for the tides? So we can then focus our management and focus the efforts of volunteers on what was going wrong so we can try to mitigate that. Again, sometimes you can't, but it's at least helpful to know at each site, how are the birds doing? Are they declining in number? Like, are we not getting any successful new birds out of this site, or is it doing pretty good? That's extremely helpful to know. So again, that's where your observations in the shift report can come in handy, because we can't have volunteers like, out in the nesting area, but you'll be outside the nesting area. And if you are seeing copulation, if you're seeing chicks, whatever you're seeing, just write it down, and it will be very helpful for us to know at the end of the season how well a site did. So we're very excited to start doing that this year. Again, SCDNR does this at various sites. So we're looking to be able to provide some data as well for our birds in the state. So we're very excited. So what do you need to do now? So you've already completed step one, and that is to watch this training in some form or another. Um, Again, most of this information is available, not most, all of this information is available on our website at southcarolina.audubon.org, which if you're watching this, that means you're already on our website. So I guess that's besides the point. But anyway, step one, watch the training. Step two, fill out a liability form, which basically says you understand that this work comes with some inherent threats and you're not going to sue us. Step three, you sign up for shifts at your site. Then you do your shift, and then the most important part is to fill out the shift report after your shift so we can know what happened. What did you see? Um, it's a good place to also, put down little stories about what went on. Did you have a particularly good experience that you want to share? Or, did you have this one super annoying guy with a dog? And that's also helpful because the next steward after you, can know to look out for this person perhaps, or to know to look out for this new pair of hatched chicks. So those are very critical. And this year, hopefully, we'll be able to share. We'll try to provide a field notebook for each site that you can manually write this all down in, which then the next steward can see. So, yeah, those are the steps. So again, your key contacts are going to be 911 and the SCNR operations game thief, which is I've never had to call them. That's just for, super duper emergencies. And maybe it's not anything to do related shorebird wise. Maybe you've seen a capsized boat out there and you need to alert them. But that's helpful to know. You have my email there. And then also, depending on your site, you will get the site leader contact because they are your direct point person. They are local. I cannot stress enough how important they are. Because if you've got a problem, as much as I want to drop everything and help you, driving 2 hours down, by then your problem is probably going to be over. So your site leader is your local go-to person. They know everything about that specific site, all of the site logistics. I do too, but they know it better. So have your site leader contact. And then another fun thing to do is we have a Shorebird Stewards Facebook group, which is just a great way to share your photos and stories with all of the other stewards throughout the 12 sites to get connected that way. We also have prizes at the end of the season, depending how many shifts you complete. The first one for 6 shifts is a pass to Audubon Spidler Forest, which is north of North Charleston and is just an absolute very special swamp forest that we have. And then 8 shifts, you'll get a reciprocity pass to basically every museum and attraction in Charleston. It's very cool to have. So, site specifics. So, depending on your site, I'm going to read them all off. But if you know that you're volunteering at Folly, feel free to skip ahead till you find Folly. But we're going to start with the northernmost one, and that's Huntington. Shifts are 3 hours and 15 minutes. That one is set in stone because staff will drive you out in a golf cart to the site. So those shift times are firm, and it's important that you communicate that you're going to be there, or if you have to cancel, because there will be staff waiting to take you out. Um, and that is Saturdays, Sundays, holidays. Mike Walker, who is a ranger at Huntington Beach State Park, is your site lead, point person, all around great guy to know. And once again, your important contacts. And here's a zoomed in look at the critical habitat area at Huntington Beach State Park. So the campground is way, way down. And so that's why you get a golf cart ride out. This is essentially way at the end of the spit, and you'll just be perusing around here. This is actually a recently improved habitat that is protected, and there's lots of colonial nesting birds in there. So that's where you will be stewarding. Dewey's Island, which is uh, a very interesting site to get to because it's only accessible by a ferry. Um, so again, that's a site where the times are pretty set in stone because you have a scheduled ferry ride. And then when you get there, the site leads will organize a golf cart ride out to the beach. And those are on very busy weekends in the summer and holidays, generally 9 a.m. to 1:30. So it's pretty long, but there are less shifts because it's just a harder beach for beachgoers to get to. And these are your amazing site leads right here, you'll get their contact information when you sign up, so they will enable you to get the ferry and so forth. So that's who you'll be talking to there. Again, this is a look at the Dewey's Island nesting area, which I believe is expanding up north on the island as well. But this is sort of the most visited section, so that's where you will be. Isle of Palms, again, is only a site when the least tern colony chooses to nest there. So last year they did not nest, but the year before they did. So when they nest, we will have stewards. And we have our lovely site leaders, Laura Lovins and Diane Troy, who are your local points of contact there. And they are on the beach all of the time, letting us know nesting status and being a great resource for volunteers. So there's a look at one of the past nesting areas, which was in the Wild Dunes complex. They have also nested outside of the Wild Dunes complex, which is a little easier for folks to get to, but your site leads will enable you to get there. So Folly Beach, shifts are Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays. However, if a different time works for you, Folly Beach is a very flexible site to have a shift at. So if you can't do Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays, you can absolutely do a weekday instead. You can do any time that works for you. Traditionally, it's 9 to 11 and 11 to 1 because those are the busy times. However, at Folly, um, it's down at the lighthouse inlet. You just have to be wary that there's a lot of traffic getting onto Folly midday, so it's recommended to start earlier. And then parking can also be a challenge down there. You have the option to get the gate key from the boardwalk office. We have an agreement with them where you could go through, because there's a gate and then there's that long paved, graffitied walkway. So we have an agreement where you can get the gate key and drive through. That way don't have to worry about parking. You just park there. And it also saves you a bit of a walk. So that is an option as well. And yeah, so um, our main absolute go-to steward at Folly is Charlie Strickland. So if you are a new steward who has not yet been out there, we can work out something where you can go out with him for the first time and he will tell you everything you need to know. Here's a little look at the Folly Beach Inlet. Again, this is way, way down. When you get on Folly, it's all the way down to the left at the end of the island. And then you walk out the paved walkway, and then there's the habitat changes year to year, but it's generally along those purple highlighted sections. So Morris Island, which is directly opposite from the Folly Beach Inlet, this site is only accessible by private boat. So if you have a private boat or want to go out with coastal expeditions, you're more than welcome. It's generally, again, we want to focus on the busiest times so we can protect the birds best and reach the most people. So Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays, it's pretty busy out there. And lots of people like to just dock their boat and hang out with their dogs right next to the least tern colony. So we would really love to have people there. Best accessed from the Folly Beach boat ramp. And then you go up the creek from there. It's a fairly short boating excursion. You just have to have the boat. And there it is on the satellite. Again, a great peninsula where least terns have nested in the past. So hopefully the habitat is still good this year, and we will work hard to get them protected. So Botany Bay, another different sort of site. That site is organized by the SCDNR volunteer coordinator, Brianna Goodwin, and volunteers at that site. You can just do it just for shorebirds, but there's many volunteer opportunities at that site to get involved in. And at that site, you don't walk all the way out to the beach because it's a long path that gets flooded by the high tide. So there, volunteers are stationed right at the entrance to that path. So before people even get onto the beach, and they staff informative tables there. So this is a great option if you're looking to do more than just shorebirds. Certainly shorebirds, there's a lot of information to cover. So that, I guess, um, but there's more opportunities here if you really love to talk about a number of things. And that's a look at the nesting area there. So again, this is that whole long walk to get out to the beach. So that's why we just station our volunteers before the walk out there to get everyone educated. Edisto. So Edisto has a couple of different sites now. The state park, and then down at Beach Access 37, which is locally run by a few very dedicated volunteers, and they are going to run their own volunteering this year. So you will have to coordinate with them because they go out when they want, which works great. But if you're interested, I'll give you their contact so you can choose the time that works for all of you all. But the state park, those I manage as well with our state park biologists there. And those shift times are generally Saturday, Sunday, holidays, 10 to 12. And like Botany Bay, you are generally stationed at the beach access. So very little walking. I mean, you're absolutely welcome to, be a walking steward there, but it generally works out that if you just station at the beach access, you can contact the most amount of people, and it's a great site if you're looking for the most accessible site. And it's hard to tell on here, but this sort of highlighted purple down here is all of Edisto State Park. beach. And a lot of that, sort of this blown out area here, is shorebird nesting. So again, that's why just stationing them at the axis here, you'll reach all of the people that are eventually going to walk down here anyway. So Kiowa and Seabrook are um, private islands. You have to have a pass in order to get onto the island. So those are autonomously run stewarding programs. They are very impressive programs. So I do welcome you if you're interested in those sites to contact um, the site leaders there to get involved. And it's definitely a robust community of volunteers there. So there's Kiowa. That's one of the Kiowa now has a couple of significant nesting areas, not just this side here by the ocean course. So um, all good things. Seabrook again, autonomously run. And there's a look at the seabrook habitat. They have one very faithful pair of American oyster catchers that are like local legends and nest there every year. So again, a great crew on Seabrook and an amazing set of birds to go with them. So Harbor Island, which is down by Hunting Island State Park. Harbor Island is a private island, but our faithful shorebird lead there, Peggy Lucas, will provide you with the appropriate pass if you're interested in stewarding at Harbor Island. There are also weekend shifts and holidays. There's a look at some of the Harbor Island habitat there. So again, you drive through most of the island, and then it's there's this lovely spit out here, which is great for shorebird resting and feeding. But then the nesting has also been pretty successful in the last year, so a very important site to steward at. And Hunting Island, um, which is a state park. So you will receive from your site leads a parking pass for the campground. Um, and shifts at Hunting Island are basically any time you want, any day of the week, anytime, very flexible. Again, it's and that's largely because you have a campground right there. So you have people there all of the time that can be educated. We have a new site leader this year, Therese Dick. So we're working on getting her onboarding, and she's going to be a great resource for stewards this year. And that is hunting. Here's this is a portion right within the last year. This whole peninsula is really nice nesting habitat and great roosting habitat in the winter as well. So again, it's all the way down the beach from the campground. You can station at the beach access. You can walk down there, whatever works for you as a steward. So Bull Point is accessible only by private boat from Station Creek Landing. Again, ideal times are weekends and holidays because that's when people tend to boat out there. So contact us if that's something you're interested in, and we can get you more details. It is a very, very important set of nesting habitat. And when boaters go out there, there's just, I mean, there's signs, but it would be really helpful to have stewards out there to be a voice for the birds. So please let us know if you're interested in Bull Point. Here's a little look at it from the satellite. And that is all of our stewarding sites. Again, a lot to get excited for this year. And it is time to get out there and educate. So, with that said, welcome to the flock. Please send me an email if you have any questions. We hope to see you on the beach, and we'll get you connected with your local site leads to begin stewardship.
All right. Thank you so much, Abby. And thank you to everyone watching this. We're excited to have you join us out on the beach. And we hope that you have a great spring and summer. And take care, everyone.